Hello friends, we are back again on your favorite learning platform, that is Learn Forward by Vidya. Today we are going to study chapter number 16, Making of Constitution. Now let's study this story, the guiding light. In the years following India's independence in 1947, the nation's leader, led by the visionary Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, embarked on the monumental task of crafting a constitution that would reflect the values of justice, liberty, equality, and fraternity. Amid heated debates and discussion, a diverse group of farmers, including Jawaharlal Nehru, Sardar Patel, and Rajendra Prasad, collaborated to create a document that would stand the test of time. As the Constituent Assembly deliberated, they faced challenging questions about the structure of government, the protection of individual rights, the delicate balance between unity and diversity. The farmers, they were basically not the farmers, they were the framers who had actually drew inspiration from the various sources, including India's ancient wisdom, the Magna Carta, and Constitution of other nations. So they were the ones who were actually, now we got the independence. Now there was a problem of having the law in place. So they had actually taken the inspiration, all these framers who were framing the laws had taken in, they had taken all this from different constitutions. Through compromise and consensus, they sculpted a living document that would evolve with changing time. With quills in hand and spirit of nation building in their heads, the framers gave birth to the Indian Constitution on January 26, 1950. This day, celebrated as Republic Day, marked the dawn of a new era. The Constitution became the cornerstone of Indian democratic framework, outlining the rights and responsibility of the citizen and establishing the principle that would guide the nation's growth. So let's come to the chapter now. अब Constitution क्या होता है ये समझ लेते हैं. कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन वर्ड तो हमने बहुत बार सुना है. अब कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन होता क्या है हम समझते हैं. कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन जो है ये एक सेट ऑफ गाइडलाइंस है जो डिफाइन करता है, गवर्न करता है एक ऑर्गेनाइजेशन स्ट्रक्चर को और डेली ऑपरेशन को, किसी भी फर्म, इंस्टीट्यूशन या एंटाइटी को. हाउएवर जब हम स्टेट के टर्म में बात करें, नेशन के टर्म में बात करें, तो एक स्कोर वैल्यूज है, ग्राउंड रूल्स है, वेल एस्टैब्लिश्ड प्रेसिडेंट्स है, और ये डिफाइन करता है, गवर्न करता है न्यूमरस फेसेस ऑफ स्टेट एज वेल एज कॉम्पोजिशन, अथॉरिटी एंड ड्यूटीज ऑफ द इंस्टीट्यूशन दैट फॉलो अंडर द परव्यू ऑफ द थ्री ब्रांचेस ऑफ एग्जीक्यूटिव, लेजिस्लेचर एंड जुडिशरी. अब इसके अंदर ये मैटर नहीं करता है कि कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन रिटन है या नहीं, इसके इन मैटर क्या करता है, इसमें क्या चीज अवेलेबल है. इट विल बी अनलॉफुल एंड अनकॉन्स्टिट्यूशनल टू मेक एनी डिसीजन दैट डजंट फॉलो इट. Constitution also establishes restrictions on government power to prevent misuse of power. Moreover, it is not static but a living document. ये एक static नहीं, living document है, because it's need to be amended and whenever required, and it is updated time to time. Its flexibility enables us to change according to changing aspirations of the people, the needs of the time, and the changes taking place in society. अब हम इसे पढ़ते हैं क्या है. British Constitution is characterized as an unwritten constitution because it is primarily unwritten, uncodified, in contrast to constitution of majority or democratic nation. जो constitution of India है ये supreme law है इंडिया का. ये lay करता है framework that defines the political principle, establish the structure, procedures, powers and duties of the government institution, and set out the fundamental right, directive principle and duty of citizen. Constitution ये कब adapt हुआ था? अडेप्ट हुआ था 26 जनवरी 1949 में, इफेक्टिव हुआ था 26 जनवरी 1950 में, रिप्लेसिंग द गवर्नमेंट ऑफ इंडिया एक्ट एज द गवर्निंग डॉक्यूमेंट. इससे पहले कौन सा एक्ट चल रहा था? गवर्नमेंट ऑफ इंडिया एक्ट 1935 में जो लागू हुआ था. इंडियन कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन जो है वो वर्ल्ड का लार्जेस्ट कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन है. एज जब स्टार्ट हुआ था इसके अंदर 395 आर्टिकल्स थे, 22 पार्ट्स में थे और 8 शेड्यूल्स थे. आज के टाइम में it has a preamble, 25 parts with 12 schedules, 5 appendices, 448 articles and 105 amendment. तो स्टार्टिंग में 395 आर्टिकल्स थे 22 पार्ट्स में, राइट. देन द 8 शेड्यूल टू द कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन, इसके अंदर 22 लैंग्वेज है, राइट. अगर हम देखें सारी लैंग्वेज है. Most of the India was under direct British rule from 1857 to 1947. Before 1947, India was divided into two entities. The British India, which consisted of 11 provinces, and princely states ruled by Indian princes under the subsidiary alliance policy. ये जो दो entities थी, merge करके Indian Union बनाए, but as many of the legacy system in British India has evolved now. At that time of independence, it was clear that India needed a constitution, but before it was necessary to mold India into a union. This meant that the princely states needed to be convinced to become a part of the Indian Union. तो princely states को मनवाना था कि वो इंडियन यूनियन का पार्ट बन जाए, या फोर्स या डिप्लोमेसी से, और ये काम किया सरदार वल्लभ भाई पटेल और एबीपी मेनन ने. इस काम को एग्जीक्यूट किया, प्रिंसली स्टेट्स को कन्विंस किया कि वो इंडियन यूनियन का पार्ट बन जाए. So until this happened, India was still legally a domination under the British, responsible for external security. The historical underpinnings and evolution of Indian constitution can be traced to many regulations and acts passed before Indian independence. Now let's come to all the acts which we have studied. Line-wise: Regulating Act, Pitt's India Act, Charter Act of 1830, 33, 53, Government of India Act, then Indian Council Act in 1861 and 92, then Modeling Reforms and Montague Welfare Reform, which we have studied. Now we are going to study about Government of India, 1935, Indian Independence Act. So these are the acts which we are going to study in this chapter. The Government of India Act in 1935 was passed by the British Parliament in August 1935. It was the longest act enacted by British Parliament at that time. It was divided into two separate acts. एक था Government of India Act 1935 and Government of Burma Act 1935. The Government of India Act of 1935 converted the government form of India into a federal form. तो इन्होंने government को federal form में convert कर दिया. The powers of the central and the state government were separated, and the state would run under the central government. This feature was strongly opposed to for the fear that the states would become slaves to the center and the state's powers would be reduced. It worked great for women as they got a separate electorate and hence a major role in the decision-making part. Furthermore, this act did not speak of the defense, which is an integral part of Indian national security, nor about the rights of people of the country. So also voting rights were limited to only 10% of the population, not making the government democratic. तो अभी इसलिए government democratic नहीं थी because voting right किसको दी गई थी? सिर्फ 10% लोगों को दी गई थी. Nevertheless, the act became the basis for negotiation between Indians and British for independence. It paved the way for independence of India and formation of the constitution thereafter. It served as a milestone and paved the way for responsible form of government in India. It was the last constitution given by India by the British before the country gained the independence in 1947. Then came the Indian Independence Act in 1947. Indian Independence Act जो पास हुआ था ब्रिटिशर्स ने पास किया था पार्लियामेंट में वो जुलाई 1947 को. इसका मेन एम क्या था? It was to transfer the power from British Crown to the newly independent dominions of India and Pakistan. तो उन्होंने ये जो सारा राज था ब्रिटिशर्स के पास जो राज था उन्होंने इंडियन डोमिनेंस को दे दिया था और पाकिस्तान को. It terminated British authority over Indian affairs. The country was partitioned into India and Pakistan. The act also repealed the use of title Emperor of India by the British Crown. This act was based on Mountbatten Plan formulated by Louis Mountbatten, the last Governor General of India. He had formulated the plan to transfer the power to the hands of the natives from the British Crown. This act was a result of years of struggle and resistance against British occupation on the India. Lord Mountbatten, however, continued as the Governor General of newly independent India till 1948. Making of the Indian Constitution. In 1922, Annie Besant was General Assembly agreed to hold a conference to draft a constitution. This marked an important step towards Indian constitutional reform. In 1925, the Indian Commonwealth Bill was presented to British Parliament, signifying a significant constitutional reform. The Motilal Nehru report, published in 1928, was considered the first major attempt to a comprehensive constitution. तो मोतीलाल नेहरू रिपोर्ट थी वो एक फर्स्ट कॉम्प्रिहेंसिव रिपोर्ट थी. Between 1930 and 1932, three round table conferences were held to discuss constitutional reform, with the first one taking in 1930. 1934 में मोतीलाल M.N. Roy proposed the idea of Constituent Assembly. The demand for a Constituent Assembly to frame the Constitution was made by Indian National Congress in 1935. Jawaharlal Nehru emphasized the Constituent Assembly should consist of elected members based on universal adult franchise in 1938. The British government accepted this demand in 1940, known as August Offer. In 1942, the Cripps Mission proposed the formation of independent nations, Hindus and Muslims. Finally, in 1946, a Constituent Assembly was formed based on Cabinet Mission. Its task was to draft a constitution for the newly independent. Cabinet Mission का काम क्या था? जो नई country बन रही है, independent country बन रही है, इसके लिए आप constitution बनाएं. The Constitution of India was adopted on 26 November 1949 and it came into effect on January 26, 1950. The making of the Indian Constitution was long and it was a very complex process. It took time of great political and social change. In India, the framers of the constitution had to balance the competing demands of different groups and interests. They had to take into account the country's unique history and culture. This result was a constitution that was considered to be one of the most progressive and democratic constitution in the world. तो ये सारा हुआ था. Let's study this. तो 1934 के अंदर एम.एन. रॉय ने आइडिया दिया कॉन्स्टिट्यूंट असेंबली बनाने का और इंडिया का कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन होना चाहिए। ये जो आइडिया था फॉर्मिंग अ कॉन्स्टिट्यूंट असेंबली वो सपोर्टेड बाय आईएनसी एंड इट डिमांड आगे रखी गई। जवाहरलाल नेहरू ने इंडियन नेशनल ऑन द बिहाफ ऑफ इंडियन नेशनल डिमांडेड दैट कॉन्स्टिट्यूंट असेंबली कंसिस्ट ऑफ इंडियंस। उन्होंने कहा, जवाहरलाल नेहरू ने 1938 में कहा इसमें सिर्फ इंडियंस ही होंगे, ब्रिटिशर्स नहीं होंगे। 1948 में जो अगस्त ऑफर हुआ तो वो मान गए। 1942 में बिफोर द क्विट इंडिया मूवमेंट क्रिप्स मिशन सेड दैट द फॉर्मेशन ऑफ कॉन्स्टिट्यूंट असेंबली वुड बी आफ्टर वर्ल्ड वॉर 2। उन्होंने कहा वर्ल्ड वॉर 2 के बाद ये ऐसा होगा। द कैबिनेट मिशन फॉर्म द कॉन्स्टिट्यूंट असेंबली हैड 389 सीट्स एंड उसमें 296 ब्रिटिश की थी और 393 प्रिंसली सीट्स थी। मेजोरिटी जो सीट्स थी वो कांग्रेस की थी। तो अगर आप देखें 1946 की हम बात करें, पर अगर हम पहले देखें जो हमने बात की थी अभी कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन की, वी टॉक्ड अबाउट कि जो हमारा कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन है इसके अंदर जब स्टार्ट हुआ था इट हैड 395 आर्टिकल्स, राइट। सो देन the 9 December 1946 the first meeting of the Constituent Assembly took place with 211 members। first president जो था वो था डॉक्टर सचिदानंद सिन्हा, राइट। तो जो बाद में जो प्रेसिडेंट बनते थे, परमानेंट प्रेसिडेंट वो बनते, ये फर्स्ट प्रेसिडेंट था असेंबली का डॉक्टर सचिदानंद सिन्हा, और परमानेंट प्रेसिडेंट बने थे आपके डॉक्टर राजेंद्र प्रसाद, और आपके वाइस प्रेसिडेंट बनते एच.सी. मुखर्जी, कॉन्स्टिट्यूशनल एडवाइजर बनते बी.एन. राव। ऑब्जेक्टिव रेजोल्यूशन लिया गया, जवाहरलाल नेहरू ने ऐसा किया, उन्होंने फिलोसफिकल स्ट्रक्चर ऑफ इंडियन कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन को लेकर वो 22 जुलाई 1947 में पास हुआ था। जो ऑब्जेक्टिव रेजोल्यूशन था ये इसने हेल्प किया कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन को बनाने के लिए। 3 जून को 1947 में लॉर्ड माउंटबेटन ने 2 कॉन्स्टिट्यूंट असेंबली बनाई। नंबर ऑफ सीट जो थी वो 299 हो गई। एंड द फर्स्ट Parliament of India, the Constituent Assembly was formed. The first Speaker of Independent India was V. Malankar, and the Chairman of Constituent Assembly was Dr. Rajendra Prasad. Then 26th November, it was adopted. The Indian Constitution was drafted by Constituent Assembly, which was elected by elected members or the Provincial Assembly. The 389-member Assembly was reduced to 299 after the partition of India. It took almost 11 years to draft this constitution, holding 11 sessions, and it was a 165-day period. British provinces were divided into 3 principal communities, having Muslims, Sikhs in general, and the members of the particular community elected representative for each community for assembly. It was taken a lot of cue from other countries' constitutions, taking inspiration and sources from various constitutions. On the other hand, doesn't make it a second hand. So Dr. Bhimrao Ambedkar को फादर ऑफ इंडियन कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन भी कहा जाता है। ये जो कॉन्स्टिट्यूंट असेंबली थी अपॉइंट हुई थी, इसमें बहुत सारे मेंबर्स थे, इनका काम था कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन को बनाने के लिए। मेन 8 कमिटीज थी जिसको प्रोमिनेंट लीडर्स हेड करते थे। जो डॉक्टर बी.आर. अम्बेडकर थे वो उन्होंने ड्राफ्टिंग कमेटी को हेड किया था, वो रिस्पॉन्सिबल थे फॉर्मुलेट करने के लिए। जवाहरलाल नेहरू चेयर द यूनियन पावर कमेटी एंड यूनियन कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन कमेटी, while Vallabhbhai Patel headed the provincial constitution committee and advisory committee on the fundamental rights, minorities and tribal and excluded areas. Rajendra Prasad led the rules of procedure of committee and the steering committee, while Nehru chaired the states committee which dealt with negotiations with states. These committees played a crucial role in shaping the future of India and the constitution. Now the constitution of India is renowned for being the world's lengthiest constitution. सबसे बड़ा constitution है हमारा। The process of framing this constitution was a meticulous one. It was a hard work done by people which took almost 2 years, 11 months and 18 days to complete. Interestingly, the original copies of the constitution were not typed or printed but rather handwritten. These precious documents are now securely stored in a helium-filled case within the Parliament Library. Originally drafted in English and Hindi, the Indian Constitution Foundation is based on the Government of India Act 1935. Additionally, it has incorporated various features from other countries. So प्रेम बिहारी नारायण जयज़ादा थे जिन्होंने हैंड रिटन काम किया था इंडियन कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन के लिए, इसको लिखने के लिए। राइट, नाउ लेट्स कम टू कि ये सारे फीचर्स हैं जो इंडियन कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन ने किसी भी कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन से पिक किया था। अब कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन की नीड क्या थी हमें ये समझना है। कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन एक फंडामेंटल टेक्स्ट है that lays the groundwork of working judicial and political system and defends individual rights, establishes guidelines for governance, aids in preserving societal harmony and stability. Society fundamental views and ideas are reflected in the constitution, which is a key document. It creates a foundation for governing, assuring a division of authorities and outlining the duties and restrictions. A bill of rights or other comparable laws safeguard individual rights. In order to promote fairness and openness, the constitution also specifies a process and guidelines for enacting, interpreting and applying laws. By holding everyone accountable for the same set of laws, it gives the government legal legitimacy and uphold the rule of law. Additionally, it brings together various communities, settle disputes, accept changes, promote stability and represent the identity and goals of a country. So India needed a constitution for several reasons. The Indian constitution was essential for shaping the newly independent nation, providing a legal political framework that respected diversity, protected rights and ensured democratic government. इस कारण से constitution का होना बहुत जरूरी था. It continues to be a vital document in India's ongoing journey as a democratic, diverse and dynamic nation. Let us take a look at some of the important features that arise for the framing of constitution. Achieving independence. इंडिया को इंडिपेंडेंस मिला था 15 अगस्त 1947 में. जब इंडिपेंडेंस मिला तो हमारे पास कोई लॉज नहीं थे, कोई रिटन लॉज नहीं थे जो हमें बताए कि हमें इसको कैसे चलाना है. सो आपको एक कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन का होना बहुत ज़रूरी था. डिफाइनिंग अ न्यू पॉलिटिकल आइडेंटिटी, तो वो पॉलिटिकल आइडेंटिटी भी हमें कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन ने दिया. इंडिया स्ट्रगल फॉर इंडिपेंडेंस वाज कैरेक्टराइज्ड बाय डाइवर्स एंड वाइड स्प्रेड मूवमेंट दैट इंक्लूडेड पीपल फ्रॉम वेरियस लिंग्विस्टिक, कल्चरल एंड रिलीजियस बैकग्राउंड. तो लोग जो थे वो जो डिफरेंट कल्चर थे, डिफरेंट रिलीजन से थे, लिंग्वेजेस कल्चर से थे. तो कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन ने क्या किया, उनको एक पॉलिटिकल आइडेंटिटी दी जिनको उनको यूनाइट करके अपनी से कहने के लिए तैयार हुई. तो कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन में सबके लिए राइट्स हैं, रिस्पेक्टिंग एवरीबडी इरिस्पेक्टिव ऑफ देयर रिलीजन एंड कास्ट एंड क्रीड. इंश्योरिंग डेमोक्रेटिक गवर्नमेंट. अब क्या था, अभी तक तो डेमोक्रेटिक गवर्नमेंट थी नहीं. वो जो डेमोक्रेटिक गवर्नमेंट है की एस्पिरेशन थी इंडियन लीडर्स की. तो कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन एक क्रूशल था इस फ्रेमवर्क को बनाने के लिए कि इंडिया को एक डेमोक्रेटिक गवर्नमेंट मिले, प्रॉपर इलेक्शंस हो, गवर्नेंस हो. फिर उसके बाद इस कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन के द्वारा लोगों की फंडामेंटल राइट्स को प्रोटेक्ट किया गया, चाहे वो राइट ऑफ फ्रीडम ऑफ स्पीच, रिलीजन, इक्वालिटी बिफोर द लॉ. फिर सोशल इनजस्टिस को भी कर्व किया गया बिकॉज बहुत सारे सोशल इनजस्टिस थे ब्रिटिशर्स के टाइम. तो इस कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन द्वारा कास्ट सिस्टम को, कोई भी प्रेजुडाइसेस बायसेस को अप्रेस किया गया क्योंकि एक फ्रेमवर्क बनाया गया कि सबको इक्वल ट्रीटमेंट मिलना चाहिए. Then came the rule of law. A constitution is essential for establishing the principle of rule of law, which ensures that all individuals, including government officials, are subject to accountable to law. तो कोई भी हो, चाहे वो बड़ा हो, छोटा, गवर्नमेंट ऑफिशियल हो या नॉर्मल कॉमन लेमन हो, वो लॉ को फॉलो करेगा ही करेगा. Preserving unity and diversity. India is known for its rich cultural, linguistic, and religious diversity. Constitution was needed to provide a unifying framework that respects and protects their diversity, also fostering a sense of national unity. तो हमने देखा था ब्रिटिशर्स के टाइम में there was a lot of divide and rule policy was happening. So people wanted something that could have unified it. So Constitution played this important role in unifying the people with diversity. Defining citizenship and national identity. The Constitution sets a criteria for Indian citizenship, therefore determining who is considered a member of Indian political community. It also contributes to shaping the national identity of India. देन इज प्रोटेक्टिंग द माइनॉरिटी राइट्स. हमने देखा था ब्रिटिशर्स ने ट्राइबल पीपल पे, माइनॉर पीपल पे किस तरीके से अटैक करके उनको भी खत्म किया था. तो इस कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन में जो भी एथनिक, रिलीजियस और लिंग्विस्टिक माइनॉरिटीज हैं उनको पूरी राइट्स दी गई है और उनकी राइट्स का कोई उल्लंघन नहीं कर सकते, इन्फ्रिंजिंग नहीं हो सकती है. देन इज प्रिवेंटिंग ऑथोरिटेरियन. तो कई एक बिहेवियर होता है जिसमें कोई किसी को दबाता है, उसे कहते हैं कॉन्डिसेंडिंग बिहेवियर, जो कि ब्रिटिशर्स का था इंडियंस के ऊपर. तो इस चीज को, अथॉरिटी को प्रिवेंट कराने के लिए कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन बना था, जिससे एक सिस्टम बना था कि ऑफ चेक्स एंड बैलेंस टू इंश्योर दैट पावर इज डिस्ट्रीब्यूटेड एंड कंट्रोल. देन इकोनॉमिक डेवलपमेंट. इतनी सारी वॉर्स हो रही थी, इतना सारा कब्जा था ब्रिटिशर्स का, तो कंट्री जो है वो नीचे जा रही थी, कंट्री ग्रो नहीं कर रही थी. तो कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन द्वारा एक फ्रेमवर्क बनाया गया जो कि हेल्पफुल था इकोनॉमिक डेवलपमेंट के लिए. इट एस्टैब्लिश द रूल्स एंड रेगुलेशन नेसेसरी फॉर बिजनेसेस टू ऑपरेट, व्हिच एनकरेजेस इन्वेस्टमेंट एंड ग्रोथ. Then, as a rule of law, as you have read that a constitution provides a framework for administrating the country, a law which is against the fundamental rights of the people can be declared null and void by the Supreme Court. जो भी law सुप्रीम कोर्ट उसको नल एंड वाइड कर सकता है जो लोगों के अगेंस्ट हो. जो रूल ऑफ लॉ है विल ऑलवेज प्रिवेल. रूल ऑफ लॉ क्या कहता है? इट इम्प्लाइज दैट नो वन इज अबव द लॉ. हर एक इंसान लॉ के अंडर ही रहेगा. This principle not only regulates the power of the government but also stresses that everyone is equal before the law. Thus, we can say that democracy and the rule of law complement each other. Right? A major source क्या है इंडियन लॉ का या कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन का? कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन ऑफ इंडिया इज इंडीड द सुप्रीम लॉ ऑफ द कंट्री एंड सर्व्स एज अ मेजर सोर्स ऑफ इंडियन लॉज. इट वाज अडॉप्टेड ऑन 26 January 1950 and lays down the framework for governance that defines the political principle, establishes the structure, procedures, powers and duties of the government institution and sets out fundamental rights, directive principle and duties of citizens. कुछ key aspects हैं, let's understand that. Supreme authority. Constitution is the highest legal authority in India. All laws, whether made by parliament or state legislation, must follow the provisions of the constitution. Any law that is inconsistent within the constitution is considered void to the extent of inconsistency. देन इज अ फंडामेंटल राइट्स पार्ट 3 जो है ना कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन में, उसमें फंडामेंटल राइट्स को अबाइड करने के लिए बोला गया है, चाहे वो राइट टू क्वालिटी हो, फ्रीडम हो, इक्वालिटी हो, फ्रीडम ऑफ स्पीच हो, टू लाइफ हो, पर्सनल लिबर्टी हो, ये सब इसमें मेंशन है. जो भी इसको वायलेट करेगा उसको गवर्नमेंट मतलब उसको आप वायलेट नहीं कर सकते. all these rights are given to every individual in the constitution. then comes the directive principle of state policy जो कि पार्ट 4 में मेंशन है. इसके अंदर दे आर नॉट एनफोर्सेबल बाय कोर्ट्स बट दे सर्व एज अ गाइड फॉर गवर्नेंस. तो ये जो है कोर्ट नहीं से ऐसे कर सकता, बट इट इज अ सर्विंग टूल फॉर द गवर्नमेंट. देन डिस्ट्रीब्यूशन ऑफ पावर्स. द कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन डिवाइड्स द पावर्स बिटवीन द सेंट्रल गवर्नमेंट एंड द स्टेट गवर्नमेंट थ्रू वेरियस शेड्यूल्स in the seventh part and the article. This ensures that each level of government has a jurisdiction and authority. तो ये कहीं पे एक जगह पे कन्फाइन नहीं, हर एक लेवल पर जो है लॉ प्रिवेल करता है. देन प्रोसीजर फॉर लेजिस्लेशन. कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन prescribes the procedure for making laws. It outlines how bills are introduced, debates are done in the parliament, and how state legislature carries it out. It also defines the roles and powers of the president who gives assent to the bills before they become law. तो हमने पढ़ा था लॉ कैसे बनता है, एक बिल कैसे पास होता है, एक टॉपिक पे डिबेट होता है, दोनों सेशंस में डिबेट होता है, उसके बाद फाइनली प्रेसिडेंट का कंसेंट चाहिए होता है. तो ये सब यहाँ मेंशन्ड है. अमेंडमेंट प्रोसेस. द कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन इटसेल्फ प्रोवाइड्स अ मैकेनिज्म फॉर इट्स ओन अमेंडमेंट. It can be amended by a special majority of parliament. However, certain provisions require not only a special majority but also ratification by a majority of state legislators. अगर कुछ चीज में amendment चाहिए तो वो इसमें हो सकता है. Then is a judicial review. The constitution empowers the judiciary to review the action of the executive and legislative branches. This means that the courts have the authority to determine the constitutionality of laws and government action. तो हर जगह पे एक चेक है, एक प्री चेक है, जहाँ पे कोई भी गलती ना करे. देन इज द इमरजेंसी प्रोविजन जो कि इसमें मेंशन है. 3 टाइप्स ऑफ इमरजेंसीज होती है. नेशनल इमरजेंसी होती है, स्टेट इमरजेंसी और फाइनेंशियल इमरजेंसी. जब इमरजेंसी होती है गवर्नमेंट को एडिशनल पावर्स मिल जाती हैं एंड सर्टेन कॉन्स्टिट्यूशनल प्रोविजन कैन बी सस्पेंडेड और मॉडिफाइड. Special provision for special state. The constitution contains special provision for certain states, particularly those with distinct historical, cultural, tribal characters. ये जो है 3 आर्टिकल 371 से 371J में मेंशन है. देन इंटरनेशनल ट्रीटीज और कन्वेंशन भी मेंशन है. जो कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन है एम्पावर करता है प्रेसिडेंट को टू एंटर इनटू ट्रीटीज एंड एग्रीमेंट विद दी फॉरेन कंट्रीज. हाउएवर ये जो ट्रीटीज होंगी इंटरनेशनल एग्रीमेंट के, ये टेरिटरी पे डिपेंड करेगा और अकॉर्डिंगली पार्लियामेंट उसे लॉ बनाएगी. अगर हम समराइज करें इंडियन कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन को, सिर्फ एक लीगल डॉक्यूमेंट नहीं है बट एक सोशल और पॉलिटिकल मैनिफेस्टो है जो प्रोवाइड करता है एक फ्रेमवर्क की गवर्नमेंट कैसे वर्क करेगी, चाहे वो इन स्टेट है चाहे सेंट्रल गवर्नमेंट है. एंड इट इज अ टचस्टोन अगेंस्ट विच ऑल अदर लॉज एंड गवर्नमेंट एक्शंस आर मेजर्ड. द इंडियन कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन सर्व्स एज अ bedrock of the legal system in India and provides the fundamental principles upon which all the laws are based. It is not only established the structure of the government but also safeguards the rights and liberty of citizens. तो ये पूरे rights देता है जो पहले इंडियंस के पास नहीं थे before independence. Now let's come to the assessment part. When did the Indian Constitution came into effect? It came into effect on 26 January 1950. Now, which of the following acts was the longest act enacted by British Parliament at the time? It was the Government of India Act in 1935. The Indian Independence Act 1947 resulted in the formation of 2 countries that were India and Pakistan. Who was the last Governor General of India under the British rule? He was Louis Mountbatten. He was the first Governor General for even after independence. Which document laid the philosophical structure of Indian Constitution? That is the Cabinet Mission. What is the primary purpose of constitution in a country? To establish a legal framework for governance. Which part of Indian constitution guarantees fundamental right? It is part number 3. What is the term of rule? What does the rule of law mean? Everyone is equal before the law. Now let's come to true false. The Indian constitution was adopted on 15th August. No. The Government of India Act was the shortest act. No. The Indian Independence Act 1947 aimed to transfer the power from British Crown to newly independent dominions. Right. The Motilal Nehru report published in 1920 was the first major attempt at the comprehensive Indian Constitution. True. The Cabinet Mission formed the Indian Constitution Assembly consisting of 389 seats. Yes, the constitution divides powers between central and state government through various schedules. Then the fundamental rights guaranteed by Indian constitution are not enforceable. Wrong. Then the constitution provides a mechanism for its own amendment. Right. Okay. Then next question is The Indian Constitution at its amendment had 395 articles in 22 parts. The 8th schedule of the Indian Constitution recognized 22 languages. The Government of India Act 1935 converted Indian government form into a federal form, separating central and state powers. The historical underpinnings and evolution of Indian Constitution can be traced to various regulation and act passed from India before India independence. The first president was Dr. Sachidanand Sinha. The Constitution safeguards individual rights and ensures democracy and stability. Indian constitution was necessary to define a common political identity for diverse groups. A constitution established a principle that no one is superior against the law. Then let's come to question number D. Explain the significance of Government of India Act 1935 in context to Indian Constitution development. The Government of India Act in 1935 was the lengthiest act that was framed by the Britishers. It was the last act that was framed by the Britishers, and it was enacted in August 1935. It was divided into two separate acts as Government of India Act and Government of Burma Act. In this, the Government of India was taken as a federal form. The powers of the central and the state government were separated, and this feature was strongly opposed by people because people thought that the states will be covered by the center. In this, majority role was given to the women also. Furthermore, this act did not speak on the defense and the integral national security, because of which it was not liked by people. Along with this, the voting rights were given to only 10%, because of which people were not happy. But nevertheless, this act became a platform for negotiation, and India started craving for independence. Now let's come to the next question. Next question is, right, so what was the role of Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel and VP Menon play in the formation of Indian Union? So Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel and VP Menon played a great role, because when they started with this act, the people were basically not ready to leave the princely states. So it was done by both these people. They needed the princely states to convince and become a part of Indian Union. So this task was done by Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel and VP Menon. Let's come to the next question. The next question is, describe the key features of Indian Independence Act 1947 and its impact of India after the Great Act of 1945. A new act was passed in the Act of 1947, in which all the powers which were given to the Britishers were passed on to independently dominance of India and Pakistan. So finally, the Britishers decided to leave India, and all the rights were given to the Indian people. Next question. Next question is, what is the significance of objective resolution? The significance of objective resolution and who presented in the Constituent Assembly? This was presented in the Constituent Assembly by Jawaharlal Nehru, and the significance was it helped in paving Constitution of India. Why was Indian Constitution essential after gaining independence from British colonial rule? It was very important for Indian to have an Indian Constitution to help the government have proper laws to build a democratic nation. It also was going through economical hardship. So it was going through a lot of repression. So Constitution was the one which not only provided guidelines to operate, and it provided ways to have a government which is democratic and which has its own laws to help people live peacefully. Now, what is a constitution? Explained in detail. If we talk about constitution is a set of laws which is given to people, and it not only helps in living them peacefully, but it also helps us understand the organization structure, the daily operation of firm, institution, entity. It denotes a set of core values, ground rules, and well-established precedent. It defines and governs the numerous facts of state as well as composition, authority, and duties that main institution that fall under the purview of executive, legislature, and judiciary branch. Now let's come to the next question. Next question is, discuss the historical evolution of Indian Constitution, highlighting the key acts and events that contribute the formation of it. If we talk of the chart which we did, right, this chart will talk of all the action that had happened in framing the Constitution. starting from 1934 when M.N. Roy gave the idea of Constituent Assembly to 1935 when the Indian National Congress demanded to put a Constituent Assembly forward. Then 1938 when Jawaharlal Nehru on the behalf of INC demanded that Constituent Assembly should consist of Indians only, which was accepted by the Britishers in 1940. In 1942 there was it was decided that a Constituent Assembly will be formed after Second World War. In 1946 a cabinet mission was formed, giving 389 seats, and the majority seats were given to Congress were 208. On 9 December 1946, the first president was made of the assembly, and he was Dr. Sachidanand Sinha. Then a permanent president, Dr. Rajendra Prasad, S.C. Mukherjee, vice president, and B.N. Rao was chosen as the constitutional advisor. Then on 13th December 1946, objective resolution was given by Jawaharlal Nehru, and he helped in the formation of constitution, which was passed on 22nd July 1947. Then 3rd June 1947, Lord Mountbatten, he had planned for 2 constituent assembly. The number of seats was reduced to 299, and then it was adopted on 26 November 1949. Now let's come to the next question. The next question is, why was the Indian, so this is done. What is the constitution explained in, sorry, these two are done. How did the Government of India Act 1935 pave the way for independence of India and the subsequent formation of Indian constitution? Discuss its major provision and implication. Now, if we talk of the Government of India Act, which was the longest act in 1935, this act was a major act which paved the role of Indian independence, because this act was passed in 1935. It was the longest act. It divided India into 2 acts. One was the Government of India Act and the Government of Brahma Act, and it formed a federal form. Now these parts were divided between the state and the center, wherein people were really afraid that the states will be subjugated by the center. In this, the women were also given given a role to participate, but in this they had a major flaws. The major flaws were there was no they did not include any national security or army, and only 10% state population was allowed to vote. But then this was a basic act which formed the negotiation between the Indians and British for independence. It paved the way for independence of India and the formation of Indian constitution. It served as a milestone and paved the India for responsible government, and finally the constitution was adopted in 1950. Now, let's come to the last question. The last question says, discuss the role of Indian constitution in protecting the fundamental rights and promoting social justice. Provide example to support it. Example, in our fundamental rights, there is a right for protecting our fundamental rights. Now, we have a freedom to speech, we have a freedom to choose a religion, and there is equality before the law. In case we are deprived of this fundamental right, we can definitely challenge people, and we can go to the law and can knock the doors of the court, because it is a constitutional right given by our constitution. Then if we talk about duties also, there are certain duties which we need to perform. In case we are not performing in duty, that can go against us. This is all about the chapter. I hope we are clear with the question and answers. I hope we had great time learning. Happy learning.